So I'm going to turn it over to Kathy. What I'm going to do, though, if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to use the chat, ask those questions. I'll be monitoring those and interjecting Kathy at appropriate times to ask those questions. So, Kathy, why don't you go for it, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thanks so much. It's been an exciting start to the webinar. I hope that the rest of it will be a little calmer, but certainly involving and interesting for all of you. So the topics for today, we're going to talk a little bit about who's using what social media tools, talk about which social media tools are working for recruiting right now, talk about some social media best practices, and just talk in general about the difference between social media recruiting versus what we call the old post and pray, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, and how that relates to your sourcing model and using a hub and spoke model. And then some technology tools to investigate that you might want to look at. These are going to be woven through the presentation in the various slides, so we'll talk a little bit about some of the ones that I think are pretty interesting and that you might want to look at. Okay, with no further ado, we'll just jump on in. Social media versus post and pray for recruiting. This really is a different model, a radically different model of thinking about recruiting. When you use social media, which is obviously enabled by all the social media tools and by Web 2.0 as a technology platform, what you're really talking about is a relationship-based model. And I'm not talking here just about the relationship with the hiring manager, but also the relationship with the candidate, as opposed to the sort of the old post and pray transaction-based, get a job rec out there, post it on the major job boards, and pray that somebody good applies to it. In that type of a social media model, you're really focused on building talent communities, pipeline building, as opposed to just filling individual recs, one-off recs as you go. You also need to be engaging top talent over time in terms of, as I said, building that relationship, building those talent communities, as opposed to just posting open positions. By its very nature, that type of engagement with top talent means that you can focus on passive candidates as opposed to only focusing on active candidates, because it's those active candidates who are coming to the job boards and essentially applying to those open positions that you've put out there. It does use a hub and spoke sourcing structure, and we're going to talk about that in some detail later on in the presentation, versus something that depends heavily on job boards. But the other thing, and this is really critical, is it does require recruiters to be someone worth knowing. Meaning, if you're going to start really forming these relationships, if you're going to be tweeting and putting things on Facebook and, you know, sending out really engaging emails over LinkedIn and posting compelling ads, then you're going to have to be somebody who really understands the jobs that you are filling, who understands your industry, who has a good relationship with your hiring manager, somebody who's seen as an advisor and a subject matter expert. If you are all those things, then candidates are going to want to know you, because everything that you do essentially reveals that knowledge about your company, your industry, the value of the jobs that you're filling, and your knowledge of what the hiring manager is looking for. In the old post and pray model, now sometimes it didn't only just allow recruiters to act as administrators, it required you to act as administrators. And this new model does sort of transform that to a little bit and really does allow you to, you know, put yourself out there as that subject matter expert, as somebody who is really knowledgeable about the industry and about the positions that you're filling. So with that start, I'd like to look at a couple of pages on statistics. This comes for the Center for Marketing Research survey of the Inc. 500, which I think is an interesting group. This is generic. It is not specific to recruiting. We'll talk about recruiting in a minute. But I think it's interesting in the comparison between 2009 and 2010 in terms of what people are using. It should not surprise you to see that Facebook is one of the highest ones. The reason why we don't see LinkedIn here, we'll see LinkedIn in a very significant way when we talk about social media specifically for recruiting. But you do see Facebook pretty heavily here. What I find fascinating is all the way on the far right is we do not use any. Went from 9% in 2009 to 18% in 2010. This is because, according to the Gartner Group, 50% of social media initiatives fail. So people try social media, and for a lot of the reasons that we talked about in our last social media webinar, things such as you've got to have a social media policy, you've got to have a strategy, you have to have people dedicated to this. You can't just start it and then quit because you run out of time. It does take a real commitment on the part of the company to make this work. People stop doing it. So I think that.
Can I just interrupt and just make a comment? Maybe you can comment on that. I was up in San Jose the other day, and I was reading an article in the Harvard Business Review this month, and it actually is interesting. It actually talked about social media advertising for consumer products, which pretty much said the same thing. It said there's a whole revamping of engaging people in the funnel and where they go to buy a product and the spend. So your point about companies not having success at it, I think they think it's just you put up a Facebook page and it doesn't work. Would that be kind of comparison to that? This is really big time from a consumer marketing to recruitment advertising. It's just a whole change in framework.
It is. It is a complete difference. And I think I've kept a slide in here that talks about why, some of the reasons why those things are failing. I mean, the number of ads that people are putting out, both for consumer marketing and for recruiting, is skyrocketing. I mean, it's growing at an astonishing rate. And yet the success rate of them is not going up significantly. And so, it still comes down to this whole point of, they did a great analysis of Twitter, and I think I have this slide in here, and found that only 9% of what's posted on Twitter is worthwhile. So again, it comes down to you got to be a person worth knowing. The information that you're putting through on these tools can't be the same old boring job descriptions. Can't be the same old, the same old thing that people see in other environments. If you're not putting stuff out there that's compelling, that attracts top talent, that explains to a candidate what's in it for them, and that really shows yourself to be a subject matter expert in this area, it's not going to be any more successful on these tools than it has been in the old tools. So the next slide here, I think,
guys, just let me kind of say, if you have any questions for Kathy, I'm following the questions. I don't hear any. If you would like to raise a point, obviously you can't talk. I would wish we could pull that off, but just ask the question. I'll review them, and if they feel relevant, I'll just ask Kathy those questions. So at least I'll be the go-between between the audience and Kathy's content, because there's some pretty powerful stuff being said here.
Right. Yes, please do ask questions. Next thing is what's working. And again, this is specific to industries and in general, social media across the board, not just recruiting. It's very interesting what's happening in specific industries as well. The least adoption of social media, the lowest, is in government contractors, energy, and financial. And if you look at those industries, you can find some things that they have in common. They are all heavily regulated. So it has tended to be the industries that are the most regulated, that are the most risk adverse and the most nervous about stepping into using these types of technologies in any way, whether it's for recruiting or for marketing. And yet, from a recruiting point of view, these are three industries that, need to be hiring and sometimes have people that are hard to find. So it's sort of a catch-22 in terms of that. And right now we're looking a lot at compliance in the recruiting process, and we're just going to be doing a webinar on that in April. So look for that, because there are definitely ways in which you can use these social media tools and make your recruiting compelling and still be compliant. And that's not the topic today, but I just want to give you a heads up. It will be an interesting topic in April. So again, just sort of looking at where things stand, two things I want to call out, one of which is the huge jump in the effectiveness of Facebook, the big change there, which was a result of Facebook changing their policy and the way that they treated corporate pages on Facebook, not just personal pages, but corporate pages. And they continue to add capability there, which I think is very interesting, including the addition of their new product, which is called Branch Out, which also competes directly with LinkedIn. And Lou's done some writing on that. Right now it's not up to LinkedIn's level, but who knows what's going to happen over time. So Branch Out from Facebook is something you need to keep your eye on. If you're not interesting, MySpace is the least effective. Not surprising. It's really dropped in terms of market share. Foursquare, if you're not familiar with it, is a mobile application. So that's the ability to sort of tell where people are and send them information based on where that is, very much consumer-based. I just mentioned it because it might be the one that's out there that you're not familiar with. But it's growing.
Kathy, how is Facebook relevant? What is Facebook doing differently in the corporate that allows them, so at least as one example, what do you mean by successful? Positioning ads, or what is it?
Well, I'm just looking purely at these numbers, where it says that in 2009, only 45% felt like they were successful at using Facebook as social media, and in 2010, 85% did.
What was the result? Successful doing what?
Because they changed their policy in terms of the way that they structure their pages, their corporate web pages in Facebook. They've added a lot of capability there. I mean, just purely from a technical point of view, you've got additional tabs that you can put in. You can link from your tabs directly to, going into your own support community, or answering or subscribing to a newsletter, so there's a lot that's been added to the capability of your corporate pages on Facebook between 2009 and 2010. They were first introduced in 2009 and were pretty low in terms of functionality. They continue to add that functionality, and I think that's why the success rate has jumped so much. Okay, let's talk. Here's the slide I was talking about before. So if you look at the social network advertising spend and the way that that's sort of jumping up, and then you look at this little slide on the right, which I just love. So this group called Pair Analytics analyzed 2,000 random tweets. And this is what they thought about what they found. That essentially 43% of the tweets were babble. These may be Ashton Kutcher's ones, I don't know, but maybe Charlie Sheen's. Not sure which ones qualify as babble, but 43% babble, 38% conversational, by which I assume that, hey, I'm having coffee at Starbucks with Joni. There was 4% that were just spam, 6% that were self-promotional, advertising some sort of service, and there were only 9% that were moderately interesting. So if you are using Twitter to advertise your jobs or to say things about your organization, you certainly want to be in the 9% that is moderately interesting. Because if you don't fall into that category, then people are going to stop following you, and you're not going to grow in followers. So you need to make sure that what you put out is not seen. By far the worst would be if it was seen as spam. You don't want it to be seen as in some way self-promotional, but you also don't want it to be seen as being babble. So what you put out there has to be targeted to the people who are going to be interested in that particular job, and it also needs to be something that is, 145 characters of compelling text, and that's something that you need to be working on.
Okay, here we have a question for you, Kath, and I want to ask a question about what does the chart on the left mean? What is that? And then I have another question that Nanette asked about the pie chart.
That is the growth in the rate of social network advertising spend. Just how fast it's going up.
What year? What years are we showing there? I can't see the years on the chart.
It didn't show on the chart. So that's the 2009 billion is 2010.
Okay, so you're saying it's grown to 2.1 billion last year from 1.7 to from 1.4.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, so now Nanette asks this question: is the chart on the left, the right, the random tweets? Are they recruiting tweets? Are they corporate tweets? Are they just a bunch of tweets?
Absolutely random tweets. So they were not specific to recruiting, to corporate, to anything. So those are random tweets. So one would hope then, if you were looking at recruiting tweets specifically, in other words, if you were analyzing 2,000 recruiting tweets or 2,000 corporate tweets, that the way that this pie chart would look would be very, very different.
Okay, so let's do a test. Let's do a real-time test. Okay. How much time, let's ask everyone on this call to just put in how much time do they spend looking at tweets, generic tweets, every day? I just would like to see how much, we got recruiters on this call, so how much time do you guys spend? Just put 5 minutes, no minutes, 0 minutes, so 0%. I just want to see what the numbers are coming in. I don't know if you guys can see it, but 0, 0, 0, 30 minutes, 0, 0, 0. Okay, let me ask you slightly different. How many tweets do you send per week? So just how many do you send out per week, tweets? I have 8, I have 0, I have 10, I have none. I guess the question I have, Kathy, then, is Twitter really useful for anybody in terms of recruiting? I mean, wouldn't it just get lost in the Ethernet somewhere, or somewhere? It just seems to be basically useless.
That is a great question. And it's a perfect lead-in to my most effective tools, because this is recruiting specific. And this comes from our friends over at Jobs2Web. It's based on 225,000 visitors to websites that Jobs2Web hosts. So it's essentially, to be in this number, you would be a Jobs2Web customer, just so that you understand where the data comes from. But Jobs2Web has a number of customers across industries, and this is all recruiting based. So the most effective tools, based on the input that they get in terms of, where people are coming from, what's driving traffic. You've got Twitter at 16%, which is pretty low, compared to LinkedIn at 47% or Facebook at 30%, but it isn't zero. So I think this comes down to a question of who are you recruiting. If you're recruiting senior experienced engineers, then Twitter's probably not a very good tool for you. If you're recruiting interns, or if you're recruiting college graduates or 20-somethings, or people like that, then Twitter might be a much better tool for you in terms of what you're doing. So I think, like anything else, you've got to look at your audience and who it is that you're trying to reach. But it still does say very much so that as tools go, LinkedIn is still the king from a recruiting tool perspective. There's another interesting chart that talks specifically to recruiting.
Wait, Kathy, one second. I'm looking at, and I can't see it, but a woman named Sandra Riff said she spends an hour a day sending and receiving tweets. So my question back to Sandra, and if you could just put it in the chat, Sandra, how successful is that? You're the only one that's really spent more than somebody else has 20 minutes, but how successful have you been doing that? That would just be interesting. I think that would tie to your point, Kath, is that it might work for people out there aggressively looking in for a certain demographic and a certain type of job.
Yeah, I'd be fascinated to know if she is in college recruiting or if she's recruiting for entry level, or if she's recruiting.
If you could just answer those questions, Sandra, that'd be great. Put them in the chat and we'll try to follow up. Sorry, Kath, but I thought that was interesting input.
No, I think that's very interesting as well. So our next chart here comes from essentially the Corporate Executive Board. You guys know that from a webinar that they did on where candidates came from. And it also has some information that was compiled for Jobs2Web. So look in the first column. This is the percentage of applicant volume by total. Now in this particular case, all of social media is sort of combined together. So this does not break down Facebook or anything else. But percentage of total application volume comes primarily directly to your career site. And I will probably make this point too many times in this webinar, but I want to say, as important as social media is, it is not nearly as important as having a strong, compelling career site. Because in the end, people have got to apply for jobs. In the end, no matter how you attract them, through whatever tool that you do, they've got to get funneled to your career site to apply for the job. And so don't put all of your attention and time and emphasis on everything else other than your career site, when that's where you're driving everybody. And as you can see, it is one of the most effective tools that you can use. Another one is the search engine. So if you look at hiring yield over to the right, applicants are more likely to be hired if this score is over 1. The only two of these things where the score is over 1 is career sites and search engines. So again, search engine optimization, driving people who go in and search on jobs, Chicago, software engineers, making sure that your jobs are showing up and they're therefore getting to that career site. So social media is very exciting, and it is changing the model. And the other thing I want to just point out is how low major job boards are. Look at that, 0.2%. If you look at success, we talked about post and pray versus social media, hiring yield, that column over there on the right, 0.5 for social media, which is only 0.7% of the change, but that's higher That is higher than your chance of hiring somebody off of a major job board. Right? So even with this new nascent technology that, nobody's sure it's working, people are concerned about investing in, it's still more successful about major job boards. So what does that tell you about how much money you should be spending on major job boards?
Yeah, Kath, let me I'm not going to answer that question, I'll let you answer it. But I talked to Ken Hollick, who's the CEO of Jobs to Web. In fact, we put a presentation on that same chart, and Ken and I actually studied the numbers. What's really happening, I think Kathy said it earlier, so I want to reinforce and answer a few of the questions, is people are using social media to drive people to the career site. People are looking online through a search engine to find your jobs through an aggregator and then driving them to your career site. So the idea of, hey, you need, so you have all these followers, and Sandra responded, her followers are increasing. That's Sandra who said she spent an hour on it. And the idea is you follow them, you send them an email saying, hey, we now have a job for you, and go to our career site to do it. So it's not just a standalone piece. It's that central core is that career site. And the article in the Harvard Business Review said, hey, start looking at where you're getting your customers from. It was consumer advertising, and reposition your dollar spend to focus on to drive people through it. And I think there's still an imbalance there. So I don't know if that was your question, Kathy, but I just want to give you the setup for it.
No, I think that was a great setup, and that really is exactly the point, is what all of these numbers tell you is that the most important place to focus your attention is on your own career site and making sure that the place that you're driving people to in all of this attraction, because, one of the other numbers that's sort of scary about this whole process is the number of people that actually apply when they get to your site. Right? Does anybody know what that is? It's under 10%. So you spend all this money driving people, and then they don't apply. So you really want to focus on making sure that you're sending them to a site that continues to engage them once they're already on that site and encourages them to apply.
Well, I think Marcia has a great question here, which is the thing I was going to say. But Marcia said, do you have a recommendation for measuring the ROI as it relates to social media? Meaning, can you track, and I know you don't know this, Kathy, but you might be able to respond to it. Does someone who goes to the career site and their application is through the career site, but they got to the career site through one of these other sources, they got it through a search engine or a Facebook following page or wherever it may have been, is there a higher ROI that someone would apply when they got to the career site if they came from another site? That seems to me to be an important statistic.
It is a very important statistic, and now I'm kicking myself because I have a slide on that, and I didn't include it in here. It was in the last webinar that we did. And the kind of, to Marcia's very good point, the real issue there is right now the percentage of the number of people it takes from a social media source to get to one hire is significantly higher than it is than the people that are coming in through search engine optimization or into your career site through SEO. And I don't want to say what the number is, but it's like 15 to 1. It's still so right now anyway. The people that you're getting in through social media are not necessarily more qualified. We're giving you a higher percentage in terms of applications to qualified hire. Right now, those numbers don't look that great. However, they're improving at a much faster rate than any other area. So it's sort of getting better faster. And that comes down, Lou, to a point that you often make, which is that at the point at which social media is absolutely the best thing that you can do, everybody will be doing it. And so it really is looking at your own particular business and the kinds of positions that you're recruiting for and understanding which positions it makes sense to use this type of tool for, and then making sure that you're using them in the best way possible. Okay, let's go on. So let's talk about some best practices. So this is number one. This is the whole question of monitoring. People are talking about your company as an employer, and you need to be monitoring that. And there's a ton of different tools in terms of doing that. I'm sorry that the Glassdoor.com thing is a little pale, but this is specific to recruiting. This is actually people who go in and post comments about what it is like to interview at your company. Is everybody looking at that? Can I just have people type in to the answers, and Lou, maybe you can watch it for me. Are you guys all monitoring
Glassdoor? Yeah, I actually looked
Glassdoor?
at it from my client. I'm doing some search. I looked at it this week. Pretty scary, actually.
Scary,
yeah, look
isn't
at
it?
Glassdoor has all the comments about how to answer interview questions. If you guys use assessments, it has it in there. It has talks about specific managers. You know this person, so pretty interesting. I lost a couple of candidates because I didn't know that certain things were being said. So I learned quickly that a lot of stuff's being said.
So if you do nothing else, if you take nothing else away from this webinar, please go to Glassdoor.com and look up your company and see what people are saying about that. Because people who interview at your company go out there and post comments about what the interview process is like, what kinds of tools you use, what kinds of questions that you ask. And you know, if you're not a very big company, then maybe you're not out there. But if you're a big company, I'm telling you, you're out there. And some of the stuff that's out there may not be that positive. So you must be looking at that. Now, if you have the option of looking at some other things, I've got a bunch of companies. I'm not going to go through them in detail. You'll get a copy of this. But what I do want to just talk about it sort of at the bottom is Social Mention and Researchly. These are both free. Social Mention is very similar to Google, except it's specific to social media sites, and it is free. It doesn't do any analytics. All of these other products do absolutely amazing analytics, and you want to think about them as massive searches. Essentially, you give them a set of keywords. So it might be a keyword about just your company name and a type of job, or company name employer, company name working at, company name employee. It's a set of search terms, and essentially these services monitor across the web, specifically around social media services, and come back and tell you what people are saying. Researchly is an interesting one as well, because that'll give you a 90-day free trial, and it does do some analytics. It does monitoring. It gives you demographic and sentiment analysis, i.e., are the comments about your company as an employer positive or negative? Are they positive or negative over time? How does that sentiment analysis change? And they can even break it down for demographics. So like younger people think that working for, I'm totally making this up, younger people think that working for the U.S. government is really, really boring. But maybe older people who want some security or used to want security, that's changing now, might think it's a great thing to do. So it might split it out, and also by geography as well. So there's some great tools out there. It's worth looking at, even if you don't have a whole lot of money. And if, as an organization, if you're a manager and you are looking at tools to keep track of this, then I would really look at Collective Intellect, which does some great trend analysis and semantic search, as well as potentially Devolve, where you can get 3 terms for $30 a month. You know, so your company name and employer, you can get 3 separate search terms. For $30, which is really cheap. So these are some things to look at if you really want to keep track of what people are saying about you on the web.
Well, I guess what you're saying here, Kath, if I look at it from a different perspective, if you're going to be in social media, first you have to understand what it is, which is a tool to build networks and drive them to your website. But then you also, to be effective, you also have to be tracking the results of all of that using these other tools, just to see if your efforts are not just what's coming to your website, but also what the world thinks of you and how effective that social media strategy is. So it's really evolved to the next level of, okay, it's not just a Facebook page or a bunch of Twitters. It's a business process that you've got to decide to go into, and you need money to pull it off. Not just money for this, but also, I think you said earlier, it's not a game. It's a real business process if you want to be in it, not just play at it.
And I would take it one step further. I would take, because that's a great point, but not only do you need to be using these tools to track what your success is of what you're doing, I would want to use these tools to see what the baseline was before I started doing anything, right? So before I really started getting out there, I might want to see, you know what, if there's a really negative sentiment out there about my organization with young people, then I might want to dig down more and find out why that is and try to do something to turn that around. Do something specifically about making my company more cool for college graduates, if this information tells me that's a problem. But if you don't know it's a problem, then you're not going to know that you need to do something about it. And then, you don't know what you're tracking because you don't know what you're trying to address. So I think also looking at this data as a baseline is really, really important. And for those of you that haven't looked at Glassdoor, I hope you do not have a rude awakening coming towards you, because some of the stuff that's out there is pretty interesting. Okay, next, branding. So I just want to talk about social media tools can be fabulous for branding. And I just want to talk about that sort of briefly because, again, this topic is an entire webinar in and of itself. But just think about the fact that your branding needs to be consistent, that it's hierarchical in nature. In other words, you've got your corporate brand, then you have your employee value proposition. Then you could potentially also have a category branding, i.e., you know what, Google is the very best place in the world to work if you're an engineer, a software engineer. There's no place better, and these are the reasons, or whatever that might be. And then the specific job brand. Getting your branding right drives attraction. And getting that message right is something that you can use in everything that you do that's external, in your tweets, in your posts, on your website, all of these things that are on the right. But the other reason, and I'm just going to hark back to best practice 1 first, is that more and more customers and employees are defining the brand for you. I do not care how much money you are spending to do advertising or branding about what a great place your organization is to work. If everybody who posts everything on social media, on Glassdoor, on any of these sites say that your company is a terrible place to work. You're not going to be able to overcome that. And so you need to think about your branding as being based on the kind of information that you're getting in your monitoring, and then in the relationship that you're building with your customers and employees online. And so the tools that you use to do this, number 1, your website, right? So your career site needs to be a place that you can go to look where people say, wow, what a cool place. Look at this great video about a day in the life. Look at these individual employees who have their blogs that talk about what it's like to work at this company and the important work that they do and how they're changing the healthcare system or protecting our men overseas or whatever it might be. And then you can take those things and reuse them on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and in your blogs, and Dig, which republishes content, and banner ads. Dig is really important for search engine optimization, so that's something you might want to look at as well. So there's, but you want to sort of, all of this needs to come from a central concept. This is what my brand is. This is what my value is. This is what my mission is. This is why we're such a great place to work, and it needs to be grounded in the reality of what people are saying about you out there. So that's a really different thing. It's a whole new world, right? We never used to care what anybody was saying about us because they were saying it to each other or saying it to their brother-in-law or saying it around the water cooler, and it very rarely came back to bite us in any way. Now that people are saying these things on the web and everybody can see them, it's something that we've got to be focused on. You can't be looking at your branding apart from this anymore. Okay, Lou, any questions about that?
Nothing that stands out. The other one that I was thinking of, because I did look at, and I'm not sure that it really had the hiring manager, but it definitely said rank the CEO, and Glassdoor it also said, what do you think of a management team? So it said, what advice would you give to the management team? So everyone who interviews goes there and anonymously describes their relationship. Have you noticed anything about, because I know that when the hiring manager seems to be an important issue, and that to me would almost, that'd be pretty tough if they start talking about that. Do you know anything about that? Anybody define hiring managers ever?
Yeah, they do ask that question on Glassdoor. There's other sites where it shows up. There's a new game that people play, which is, would you like to work with this person again?
Wow.
And they rate people, where you take 6 people and you say you rate them. This rank people. This is where it's a LinkedIn thing. This is the person that uses LinkedIn. This is the person I'd like to work with again. So all of this stuff is coming out. If you've got managers who are terrible interviewers, who have a terrible affect and don't treat people very well, this is no longer your dirty little secret. This is very shortly going to be everywhere. And so certainly from the concept of hiring manager training, but also just in overall management training, it's going to become something that I think is going to become much more important for exactly that reason. Just a quick slide on the job branding process, because I think this is so important. We talked about, how this inherits itself, the employer brand, potentially the category brand. So employer brand is Google, category brand is software engineers, job brand is this specific job, and doing creative ads by jobs. You really want to think about this from understanding the job, the ideal candidate demographics, the big themes, projects, and challenges, the linkages to the company's strategy and brand, and then write that category for major job groups targeted to that ideal candidate. So there is a process for doing this effectively. It's one of the things that we train you on in our training, but it really is a process to doing this effectively. And if you do it effectively, it's really, really successful in getting people. One of the customers that we worked with increased the number of applicants that they had to a help desk job by five times. 5 times what they had before, and got, what they consider to be the perfect candidate, simply by going through this process. So there are ways that processes that you can use that allow you to use these tools in really effective ways.
Let me ask a question to the group here, Kath. So let's assume that through social media, I go to your company's career website, and I see a job that I'm interested in. When I read that specific job, because that's really the reason why someone would apply, how many of you are posting job descriptions that emphasize skills, duties, and responsibilities and list the rec number in the first few lines? Just say yes or no that you generally post traditional job descriptions. So we got 1 yes, a no, a yes, a yes, a yes. You generally post. So I'm going to contend it doesn't really matter, guys, whether you use social media or not. It's useless if you're posting traditional job descriptions. How many because traditional job descriptions define lateral transfers. How many good people who are passive, who are fully employed, are looking for lateral transfers? And if your answer is none, then why would you post to that group of people you're trying to attract? So all this work you're doing, driving them to the career site, you wind up with a boring ad, and it's all for a waste of time.
It's a very good point. So
Holly says I can't get my company to change. Well, then I would change companies and post that on Glassdoor. I'm being not really being facetious. If they don't change, what's the point? I mean, you look at it, it's like saying, hey, we're okay. We just want to hire average people. So I think you got to take that level. It's not just that and I think what Kathy's saying here, this is beyond the individual recruiter. This is beyond the individual recruiting department. This is beyond the HR group. This is the whole company has to look at this strategically, not just you, the individual recruiter, tweeting a few things or helping create a Facebook page. You got to think about the fact that if you want to maximize candidate quality and get the best candidates, everything counts. And that if you're posting job descriptions, that counts the most, because at the end, that's what the candidate's looking at, and unless they're desperate, they're not going to apply. I've been preaching that for 20 years, so it just seems to be more true as I read Kathy's chart here.
Okay, hub and spoke. We've been talking about hub and spoke, and I want to make sure that I have some real time to talk about this. So this should tell you why your website is so critical. A hub and spoke model says you're going to use these social media tools to drive traffic to your site. From your Facebook page, when you post a job, you've got to drive them here to apply, right? So you've got to drive people here to your website, to your community, to your talent hubs, and then finally to your ATS, right? Because they've got to apply. And this entire strategy that you're putting together with this compelling content and this branding and everything else is based on this concept that you're going to use all of these different tools to drive people to your career site with these microsites and talent hubs that are using blog widgets and videos and leveraging niche sites like the Daily Beast. That's an example of a niche site. And pulling everybody into your compelling website. Remember, your career site is compelling, and you've got talent hubs that are specific to categories of jobs, like engineers. But in the last analysis, the ultimate hub is your ATS. If your application process sucks, then all the investment that you have made in everything else is not going to pay off the way that you want to, because people are not going to get through the application process. And you've also got to make sure that you understand compliance issues. And again, attend Lou's webinar in April, because he'll talk some about that. Because this whole process, if you're a government contractor, you sell to the government, there are issues around compliance for all of these issues, some of which make it a lot easier, by the way, but things that have to be followed to make sure that you don't get in trouble. So this hub and spoke model, as opposed to, hey, I'm just going to post something on Monster over here, I'm just going to post something, this whole concept that says, not scattershot, but really focused on pulling people, engaging them, and continuing the conversation with them once I've got them on my website. So the other absolutely critical best practice, which I should have called out here that I didn't, that I think is so important, is on your website, not everybody's going to be ready to apply. Make sure that you have a button that says just looking, so they can click on that and give you at least an email address and their name, so that you can continue to communicate with you. You can do drip marketing. You can send them jobs that are specific if you have that much information, but at least send them an email that talks about that your company is hiring in these areas, or won this big contract, or whatever that positive information about your company. You need to get enough information to start the conversation.
Okay, Kath, let me kind of take a slightly different tack on this. I'm going to contend at the dawn of the internet in let's say when job boards really became big in the early 90s, the idea of let's post a requisition became the mantra. This Monster and Career Builder was selling job postings, and they formatted it like a job description. Prior to that, most companies really used these big display ads that were different. They just actually more creative and more marketing oriented. The idea that we're almost coming back to, which I call the hub and spoke, is not a requisition-based hiring methodology. Most people say, I've got an open rec, let me post the rec on my career site, and then it gets pushed out to all these other sites, and aggregators find it, and then they're pulled back. That's a rec-based model. This new model is the hub and spoke. Let's create mini sites, which is a very important point, for our salespeople. Let's create a mini site for our call center people. Let's create a mini site for our engineering. Let's create another site for our managers. And when people start looking on social media, they said, I'm looking, or they go to an aggregator, or they look, just use a Google to find a job. They then get positioned to the hub, or even this microsite. Here's all the engineering jobs at XYZ company, Acme Plumbing. Pretty cool. Not one of them is not interesting, but I do want to follow the company. So a lot of what you see is the model is the paradigm of how the structure of sourcing is fundamentally changing, going from using social media as the driving force away from a rec-based model, which does require government reporting, especially OFCCP. Every time you open a rec, you got to start reporting. When you just post looking for prospects, there's no reporting. You don't have to report on candidates who are following you. When you open up a rec and say, hey, now we have a rec, well, now you do have to do the reporting. So a lot of things change when you go to this model using social media. And that's why I say I think you got to look at it and zoom out a little bit and say, okay, are we doing it right tactically? We got a Facebook page, but are we doing it right strategically? All the measurements, all this other stuff, the model is changing. Our recs have to change to support that. And I think that's where I think this concept is very, very important here. And this is actually the driving force of a lot of this. This is a different way of looking at recruiting and sourcing, moving from rec-based to hub and spoke-based.
I think that's a great point and a great way to look at it. And then to another way to look at this as well, and I won't spend too much time on this, but it's something that's called a clickstream diagram, which is where are you driving people? In everything, this is a different look sort of at the hub and spoke, which is almost a more technical one. You have all these variety of things out there that you have on the internet. Do you understand where you're driving people? And in the end, are you driving them somewhere that they can apply to? I listen to people who talk about, I have an entire campaign and all this money dedicated to getting more people to fan me on Facebook or getting more people to follow me on Twitter. You know what? That is not an end in itself, because they can't apply for your jobs on Twitter. They can't apply for your jobs on Facebook. In the end, they've got to come to your ATS. So make sure that you understand that in everything that you're doing on the web, where you're ultimately driving people from and to, and so that you're not essentially driving people, spending a ton of money investing on getting people to, friend you on your Facebook page, which in the end doesn't mean anything in terms of an increase in applicants. So looking at this from sort of this technical perspective, I think is helpful as well. Okay, so question, if you build it, will they come? So if you are driving people to your career site, this whole hub and spoke model that is this whole different way of looking at sourcing and at engaging people, it really does need to be good. And then once you have people in your ATS, or if you're somebody who's using Salesforce.com or another tool for people before they actually apply, for these people who are just looking, then you can segment those people. Essentially, people who are interested in engineering jobs, people who are interested in marketing jobs, people who are just interested in the company, to be able to send them targeted emails that are of value to them. If you're going to take their time to read it, it's got to be of value to them. And using social media is a great way to gather email addresses. So I've talked about on that clickstream diagram, are you driving people to a place where you can get their email address and then use some type of system, whether it's your ATS. ATS is really stuck at this, so it might be another tool for these targeted emails and marketing to continue this conversation. And this whole question of, making sure this content is compelling. Now that I have your attention, I'm going to give you something of value. I'm going to talk just briefly about contests. It's a fabulous way to gather email addresses and to help build your resume database. One of the great examples that we've had are the guys that took Harrah's, who brought MBA students to a Texas Hold'em contest in Las Vegas. And they had to get there, but they paid for everything else. And essentially, the price of admission was their resume. Right. So when I talk about contest, it doesn't have to be something that you do on Facebook. It can be sponsoring science contests. It can be, again, it needs to be appropriate to who you are trying to recruit, but people do love them. Best practice engaging. What are some of the ways that you can engage with people? On your website, remember, unique content drives search engine optimization. There's a lot of ways to try to game Google, but none of them work very well. So what you have on your website needs to be essentially the content about what makes your company unique and talks about that EVP, that employee value proposition. The talent hubs that say why your company is the best place in the world to be a software engineer or a salesperson or an HR person or an intern. Day in the life descriptions, videos. It's a very cheap way to build cool content. Run a contest with your employees. Give me a 60-second video about why you like working in our company. And we're going to choose the top 5, and we're going to feature each of them, on our website, and you all are going to get, a Starbucks card or, a card for dinner, whatever that might be. Leverage your employees in terms of doing this. LinkedIn, you've got to be using LinkedIn, and there's a whole training class that Lou does about how to use that effectively, so I'm not going to talk about that now, except to say it is one of the most valuable tools that we have right now in terms of recruiting. And again, be compelling. For all of you that say that you are posting your job descriptions right now, I want you to put out your right hand and slap it with your left hand, because every one of those job postings is an ad. Everything that you are putting out there in the web, you need to think about that as being an ad in the same way that you would anything else that you use as an ad. So it has to have all of the things that an ad should have: a compelling title, a great description, a what's in it for me message. And your email should have that same kind of compelling concept. And then, again, there's some great things you can do with evangelist bloggers. If you've got people in your company who are well-known, who can blog and can comment on other people's blogs, a great thing to host that is WordPress. As I said, Dig is a great tool for search engine optimization because they will repost content. Alumni networks. If you're a big company and you have alumni networks, there's a tool out there that I love. It's called www.yourmembership.com. It's incredibly cheap. And you can, for $6,000 a year, you can launch the most unbelievable alumni network you've ever thought. You can use it for a bunch of other things as well, but Alumni Networks is one of the strongest. And then contests on Facebook in particular, I told you to tell you about some cool technology. Yourmembership.com is one. Wildfireapp.com. unbelievable tool for running contests on the internet and gathering information. Just be sure that you're not asking for too much. You might just want their name, their email, and the type of job that they're interested in. If you can get that much information, then you can start communicating with them.
Hey, Kath, let me just ask the audience while you're wrapping up here. Has anybody run any contests? If you've run a contest, just say the contest you've run. It'd be kind of interesting to see, or no. The answer is no. But if you've run any kind of contest that's from a sourcing, recruiting standpoint, that would be kind of interesting.
Okay, great, and I'll keep going. So best practice responding. So this is forget your branding investment if your ATS and application process sucks, because people are not going to get through that process. Secondly, forget your engagement strategy if you're going to ignore applicants. Think about this as a closed-loop process. The people that apply, this is all about personal interaction. So you want the message that goes back to this person to be a personal one. They took the time to apply. They were part of the 10% that applied to your jobs. So you want to make sure that the response that goes back to them is as personal and as engaging as possible. That for some reason people seem to overlook that. One of the primary complaints you get from applicants is this black hole. So don't spend all this time to engage applicants and then ignore them when they apply. Also, don't forget everything we talked about last time in terms of people and process, and that's on our website if you want to go back if you missed our earlier one. The second thing is don't ask for ideas and feedback if you're going to ignore them, right? If people send you feedback, you need to respond to that. Be prompt, honest, transparent, and polite, the rules of social media, and humor always helps. Okay, a couple more slides to get through here. I know our time is running out.
You might have to jump, but somebody at Deloitte, I guess somebody mentioned Green Dot had a campaign, or Deloitte had a campaign using Green Dot. So I'll just say Deloitte and Green Dot. I'm trying to find out what that is because I know we have a client called Green Dot. I didn't know they ran contests, so I suspect it's a different company. But I just wanted to run that through. Bye. And then somebody said it's amazing video on YouTube, so you might want to check that out. Whoever checks it out, let me say, we have a contest. Whoever checks it out first and sends us an email will get a free copy of my book.
Cool.
We just ran a contest.
And building brand ambassadors, using your own employees as brand ambassadors. You want to view their expertise as a benefit, not a liability. We talked about running a contest for videos, give them the opportunity to blog, create a guru status, and let them reply to some posts. So these are also some ways to retain some of your top people. You know, make sure you've got your social media policy in place. We talked about that last time, and the old trust but verify. So just make sure that you're keeping track of what they're doing. And then remember that you want to limit your investment in social media until you have a great career website and an acceptable application process. And I say acceptable because that's about as good as you're going to get with an ATS.
Hey, Kath, let me kind of qualify that. I would disagree with that. The point is, if you get a bunch of great followers and you email and a recruiter calls that person up and says, you've got to apply. So I think the idea of, I would say if you don't have a great application process, do everything you can to avoid it and capture them in your follow-up, try to interview them ahead of time, and then as a last resort, get them into the application process. So I think I would say you got to live with it because it isn't going to change. So how do you take a shortcut around it somehow using social media? So I think you can live with it, but you won't get great results if you decide that's your primary tool to get people.
I would totally agree with that, but I would also say that you only have a certain number of dollars to invest, and I would rather see you invest in that career website and talent hubs, not ATS because that's a different story, but certainly in your own career website. I would spend money there before I would spend it in the coolest Facebook site in the world if you have a choice, right? And then go into your social media because most of the stuff that you do in social media is free. So spend your dollars on making sure you've got that career website. To what Lou said earlier, this is all part of an overall strategy. It's very hard for you guys individually to set the strategy for your company on social media, and it does need to be integrated. And then finally, you know, social media won't fix boring job descriptions and poor interviewing. It will just make them more visible, which is a bad thing. So you really need to focus on fixing those. Again, it's all about the conversation. Don't start something you can't continue. And honesty is critical. You don't want to use these great tools to tell somebody that an entry-level, you know, job that's not that great is the best thing from sliced bread. You want to talk about why they want to work for your company and how this is a great entry point, and find the person for whom that is a great job. Because there is somebody for whom it is, but misrepresenting it is just going to get you in trouble down the road. So don't lose. These tools can be really cool, but you don't want to use them to misset expectations, because that's only going to lead to turnover. Okay, I'm at 1:58, so I've got 2 minutes to go, but here's some ways to engage with us since we've been talking about engagement. If you're not a member of recruiterswall.com, please join. Subscribe to our newsletter at adlerconcepts.com. Please link in to me, and also to Lou, who is just Lou at adlerconcepts.com. Potentially look at our Recruiter Bootcamp audit, and we'd be happy to talk to you about a career website or social media assessment. And I think that's it, yes.
Why don't you go back to that last one, Kathy? Yeah, interestingly, I met with a recruiter up in San Jose, California 2 days ago. She might be on the call. Interestingly, she had a job as a recruiter at Google, and it was a good job and was excited to take it. But the recruiting manager at her company called her and said, I'd like to show you what we have at our company. And she applied at both jobs. She got an offer at Google. She was ready to take it. This recruiting manager said, no, I think I'd like to chat with you. This is something we have here. And as a result, she took the other job because of the personal association with the hiring manager. And I think we can do all of these things. I think there are ways to get around the application process, because you're not going to change that. So I would just figure out ways to change it. So let the IT folks figure that out and go do the backdoor approach to get people in. I know a lot of companies do that. But I think the idea that the importance of the messaging, the importance of the brand, the importance of the job, the importance of the hiring manager, and the importance of the recruiter is what it really takes if you want to get passive candidates. Social media is an entry point. It's not the ending point. And I think you got to think of it systemically and zoom out at 10,000 feet and say, hey, what do we have? Bottlenecks and holes where the thing's falling apart. And I think that's really what Kathy's message is all about. It's more than just social media. It's a very critical opening end of the funnel, but it's only the opening door. It's not the back door.
I saw a couple questions about what are some sites that we like in terms of career websites. I like Johnson & Johnson's, JNA. I like their career website. I think that I guess we did it about a year ago and did some good stuff with it. Toll Brothers, the construction guys, theirs used to be very strong. I haven't looked at it recently. GE's is not bad. It's not my favorite, but it's pretty clear, and it's got some nice talent hubs. And Vanguard. So those are just 4 for you to look at to get some ideas. Any other questions you want to address before we sign off, Lou?
I don't think so. The green dot it's the green dot in Deloitte. That's in their logo, not the company Green Dot. Thank you very much for clarifying that, the number of people who did that. Yeah, I think some of the big 4, the Accentures, the big consulting firms, the Deloittes, they're really pushing the envelope. And the reason I like them is they have high volume needs, and they also have A-level quality needs. So they've really thought it through from that standpoint. The other ones I'd also think about are consumer products companies that have adapted their consumer. They're trying to get customers. They've got a strong marketing group, and they've applied that to their websites. And I haven't checked yet, but the department stores used to be, the retail stores used to be very, very good, because they've got their candidates going out the recruiting office, the HR office, and walk into the store in the front. So sometimes because they're so close to that, they recognize the parallel aspects of recruiting and getting customers. With that, I thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kath. Hope to see you guys soon. Make sure that you check out our events page. We got a bunch of upcoming webinars, particularly the one on, we're developing a process called Quality, Cost, and Compliance, the QCC model. How do you maximize quality, minimize cost, ensure compliance? So a lot of what we're trying to talk about here is, hey, let's build a consistent hiring process that does all of those things. Thank you very much, everybody. See you soon.
Thanks, everybody, for your time. Bye.